Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Black Baseball Mixtape. I am your host, Cheats, and I am very excited. We have a very special guest joining us for today's podcast. I normally brag about my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. I know this is a national podcast, but I normally brag about my hometown of Richmond, Virginia more than most. And it is always awesome, just flat out awesome to have someone that reps the same hometown that I do. So joining me on the program, associate head coach of Kansas State baseball, Austin Wates. Welcome to the Mixtape, my man.
Thanks, Cheats. Really excited to be here. Been listening for a little bit and excited to kind of rap with you a little bit.
Well, I'm excited because I'm always excited about hometown first and foremost, and I know you played at least most of your formative years and your high school years in the Richmond, Virginia area. We're going to talk about all of that, but I want to talk about. I always like to start with where we are now and then go back a little bit. And where we are now, as you have been named associate head coach. You've been with Kansas State for 6 years, but you've been named associate head coach of the Wildcats. They are preseason number 24, and the rankings about to kick off their season in about a few weeks now. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about being named a Hostess head coach. What does that mean for one of the top programs in the country?
Thanks. It's been, this is my 6th year with the program, and it's been really fun changing the culture and being a part of that. And, obviously not only just being a part of it, but getting to recruit kids, that align with our philosophy and what we're trying to do here. And it hasn't been easy. I mean, that's been really challenging to do. And how much college baseball has changed over the last 5 years, with COVID, with, the portal, with all that stuff coming into play. It's been really, really fun and challenging. There hasn't been a year of stagnant stuff going on. Everything's been changing each year. So it's been very, very cool and very thankful, to get the opportunity and the blessing from the administration and our head coach, who's been with me since I first moved to Virginia. So very, very excited. Nothing's really changed as far as my role. More of a title change and just kind of a vote of confidence from kind of everybody around. So
Well, that's awesome to hear. You've got a really exciting team coming up, but you just mentioned it. It's been the last 6 years has been a grind. One thing about Kansas State baseball, it seems to have gotten better and gotten competitive every year. You are a big part of that, not just with the development, but the recruiting side. People always ask me, and I don't know the answer because I'm not a recruiter or a coach. What type of players do you look for to help change the culture of a program?
yeah, I think, I mean, you obviously need a baseline of talent. There's no doubt about that. We can't just have good kids here. We have to have good players as well. So there's a baseline, but we're looking for really tough, hard nosed kids. That's a really important thing for our culture. Uh, you know, we do have to go play out of region. We will go get out of region kids as well. So, we open up the season in Arizona, but we're going to come back here the second week of the season, and it's going to be, cold weather. And, I tell kids all the time that we recruit, if you want to play in the big leagues, at some point you're going to have to play in cold weather. You don't get a choice. So it's a really good start to learn how to do that here. We don't play all of our games in cold weather. That's just a part of it. But yeah, hard nose. I want hard workers. I want, the guys that do the right things when you're not looking. When the camera's not on them, it's easy to say the right things. It's much harder to do them on a consistent day-to-day basis, when no one's around. And it's taken a while to get a group of guys. We flipped it relatively quickly, but it's taken a while to get a group of guys that really buy into all of that stuff. And it's been fun, like I said. So,
Well, this year's team seems to be that. Well, look, without putting too much into the preseason hype, but looking at the number of returning players that you have, along with the work that you guys have done in the portal, some new places. This year's team seems to have really made their imprint on Kansas State, and seems to be a team where, by design, if you and the coaching staff were going to design a team that fit the Kansas State baseball mold, it seems like it would be this 2024 team. Am I too ahead of the game, or is this do you all circle this class on the map and say, hey, this team might have something here?
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty accurate statement. I think, we're really excited about the group of guys that we have, not only the veteran core of guys that have been here, but some of the new pieces that we've supplemented that, fit into the culture, but also have the ability and experience to play in the Big 12 every day is really important. I think this is one of the first years that we've gone into the season not having to rely on a lot of young players to be ready right away. We have some young players that are very talented, but if they don't necessarily perform right away, that's okay. We have guys that can fill into some of those roles, but um, very excited. I think we're dynamic. I think we can beat people a lot of different ways, whether it's running, hitting home runs, getting on base. We have swing and miss stuff on the mound, kind of all throughout, whether it's starting pitching or bullpen. So really excited to see, how our guys compete when those lights turn on. So
Does the message change for this team?
I don't think so. I mean, hey, clearly we have some unfinished business. I think our guys were really upset about the way that, the committee handled it last year with us and with that team and where we finished in conference. And we've taken that kind of um, into the last fall. Those guys played all fall with a grudge, with a chip on their shoulder, and we. I hate using the term "leave no doubt," but our guys just want to go full force, every single game this spring, so that we don't leave any doubt with the committee.
And that you bring up a good point, because this was last year was a really good team, really competitive in conference, played a pretty competitive schedule overall, and got left out of the regional. And that, for people that are unfamiliar with Kansas State baseball, that's your opportunity to really even compete to be able to go to the super regional on your road to Omaha. I know a lot of folks, not just the K State faithful, felt that the work that you guys did last season deserved to put you in. Uh, like you said, when it leave things up to a committee, it's just like any March Madness or anything else. There's always those first four on the outside looking in. Kansas State was one of those teams, but this year, with the experience you have coming back, really has a. I mean, has it become a mantra for this year to that leave no doubt?
It has, and we just want to approach and attack every game like it's going to mean everything at the end of the season. And I think our guys know that. And we didn't play great midweek last year. So, one of our goals is to play better on the road and be a really good midweek team as well. And coach has built our schedule, built a really tough midweek schedule for our guys. We're on the road, at Tennessee, at Clemson, at Northeastern, at UConn. And so it'll be a really good test for our guys. And I think, we have a really tough group of kids that are grinders that don't care what time we play, where we play. We just care that the scoreboard is on and we're going to go out there and compete. And I think that's been the consistent message with our players every single day of the fall and kind of leading up to the spring. So
I try not to ask about particular players, but I will ask about one. He's already been on the mixtape in the past this season. We're really excited about Keelan Culpepper. It's very obviously, when we're talking about just sheer numbers overall in Division I baseball, it's very rare to have a associate head coach at a major program, Power Five program, like yourself, being African American. You also have an African American Team USA preseason All American player in Culpepper. What is that like, being able to see him and actually understanding that you've traveled a lot of the path where he's going? Like, how is that for you, seeing as someone that you can kind of look at and maybe even see a little bit of yourself in?
Yeah, there's a funny story behind when we recruited Kalen, in high school. Just a little bit of background. He's a Tennessee kid. I went to a small private school in Tennessee, I think it's St. Benedict's at Auburndale, I think it's called. Who, like you said, I mean, it was similar to me. I went to St. Christopher's in Richmond, Virginia, small private school. But KC in the travel ball circuit played for a bunch of different teams, mainly East Cobb, but he was a switch hitter. And a lot of people saw him hit from the left side because typically you're going to face right-handed pitching, right? And his left-handed swing was not great. It was kind of competitive for that level, but I kind of knew the first time I saw him that it wasn't going to play at our level. And so when I was recruiting him, I knew right away that he was going to be a right-handed only guy, which was fine. I loved his right-handed swing. But to kind of watch that happen, and he was all in right away when we started recruiting him as far as sticking to the right side. But now looking back, I realize, man, a lot of these teams and schools that probably came to see him play saw him hit from the left side and just kind of gave up on it right away,
Wow.
Yeah. So really interesting there. But, the cool thing about KC is he's one of our hardest workers, and specifically when the lights aren't on. He doesn't really care for the camera. He doesn't seek it out. I went to a football game in the fall and came back to our indoor to turn out the lights, and I hear music before I walk in. And of course it's, KC in there by himself getting reps off of, our home plate machine, which is a pitching machine that you can use on your own. You don't need anybody to feed it. It's like 9:00. He's in there on his own, so that's just who he is. But part of our recruiting process was I came from a very similar background to him. I played a similar position, and I've been, one of the only African-American guys in the dugout. So I've seen what he's seen, and I wanted to help him through that. And that was a big selling point in the recruiting process for him. So.
And that's amazing because you're exactly right about that. We were just talking about this before we kind of hit record on the podcast. The landscape across, especially a conference like the Big 12, is changing. It's not a plethora of African American players per se, but now you're starting to see, 4, 5, 6 on a team, which is different.
Yep.
And because of the nature of the process, let's call a spade a spade. When you see brothers on those teams, they're not sitting.
Right.
They're playing, and usually they're really, really good.
Yep.
When you look around the landscape of college baseball and just see how the numbers are shifting, albeit a slow, how does that make you feel as somebody? You played Division I over at Virginia Tech, but when you start to look around the Big 12 and you're like, man, Texas, geez. They're bringing 6 or 7.
It's exciting, man. And I think that same shift, and I'm not a huge NFL guy, I know, but in 20 years ago, you weren't seeing as many black quarterbacks as you're seeing right now. And I think people are seeing there's talent out there to be had. You may have to look a little bit harder for it, whether it's an inner city kid or they're giving more players opportunities to play this game. And I think on that same note, it's becoming more attractive to the African-American community. And, you're seeing guys like, I think, last year, Jazz Chisholm, and the year before that, Tim Anderson with the Cubs. I mean, those guys are really making a mark, in the community, and people are seeing, okay, this is a sport we need to get into and watch a little bit more. So.
Absolutely. No, I think the personality shift in regards to, which is another thing we could probably talk about, the personality shift in regards to the player. And this is across the board. I mean, you see it with young white players as well, but you're starting to see young black players in particular really show their personalities, especially when you're looking, if you're going to those high school games or those travel ball games, you're starting to see some swag, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term. You're
Yeah.
starting to see some swag that you've never seen before, and I do credit it to just a little bit of kind of letting the younger guys really show their stuff, whether it's Jazz Chisholm or Will Benson. You're starting to see um, in ways that I don't think, Coach, you could show when you were coming up,
Sure.
because it would have been a ding. It would have been, oh, Austin Waits thinks he's full of himself. Look at
Right.
that bat flip. You're
Right.
starting to see that as somebody that's recruiting kids. Does does that come into play for you?
We talk to our guys about it all the time, and whatever you do on the baseball field, you know, you don't want to ever, to me, you don't ever want to show up your opponent, right? And we always tell our guys, act like you've been there. It's okay to show a little bit of personality or passion or fire, but make sure that is directed at your teammates, because whatever you do on the field, you're representing, for us, Kansas State baseball, right? And anything that you do could hurt the guy behind you, could hurt, the rest of the team and the image of the team. And we want all of our guys to celebrate and be fiery and happy, but in a good light, right? And it doesn't necessarily hurt a guy. It tells me a little bit more about them. Maybe they want to show a different side of their personality. I do think that baseball needs more personality. I do. There's a lot of those kind of
It's coming.
Jurassic rules that have always kind of ruled over baseball. You can't do this, you can't do that. The unwritten rules.
Mhm.
Um, so I think those guys are good for the game, as long as it's within reason. I think it still needs to be respectful of the opponent, right?
You
So
know, the funniest part about that is I think even more so than in the major leagues, definitely more so than affiliate ball, Division 1 college baseball in particular has more of that pageantry. I'm talking about team
yeah,
celebrations,
yeah,
um, you know, the different types of things when players hit double. Like, it's always been this spirit of college baseball where the team is so involved. If you're on the bench, you're on the top step of the dugout, and if there's twos across the board, you're shaking it up, or you're doing some type of team celebration. And I always thought that professional ball could take something from college baseball in that sense, because a lot of times, especially the minor leagues, you really are. It's like almost like a business transaction.
it is. Yeah, yeah. I remember it's almost like every man for himself, right? And
I think
in pro ball, for especially, I mean, really until you get kind of later in the season and people are making their playoff pushes. And so, college baseball is kind of one of those. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's like college baseball is like the last true form of baseball, where everything is so team oriented, right? Everybody's rooting for each other, and I do love the celebrations. I think they're great, and I know they've gotten a little out of hand the last couple of years. I know Virginia Tech, my alma mater, brings
as a years, you got the sledgehammer.
the sledgehammer coming out
I
of the
love it. I love
dugout.
it.
And that's a lot, but I respect the team chemistry that comes along with that. So I do think that's a pretty cool aspect of our game.
So let's take a step back, because one of the things that I love hearing about there, and I will preference this by saying, Coach, they're not like awesome feel good stories, but one of the things I love hearing about is coaches, especially at your level in college baseball, becoming coaches. And what I mean by that is, even if you've always wanted to be a coach, the barrier of entry, the entry point to being, so a lot of them are kind of, what's the position of coaching that's like you don't get paid, and you're almost like an internship, if you will. Almost, it's a position, but
Yeah,
they're coming in at the very entry level, and it's very, very hard to make a living,
yeah,
especially as an assistant coach in
yeah.
college baseball. So I always love to talk to coaches and hear how it started for them, how many places you had to land before you landed where you are, and how long did it take before you picked up steam? Because let's call it like it is on the mixtape. There's not a lot of we were just talking about this. There's not a lot of permanent assistant coaches in D1, let alone the fact that there's not a lot of head coaches.
Yeah.
So you guys are a small club.
Yep.
How did it start for you to be able to get into coaching and be at the college level like you are today?
Yeah. My story is pretty unique. I don't think it happens to many people, and I'm very cognizant of that and appreciative at the same time. But our head coach, I played for Pete Hughes. I played for him at Virginia Tech. And then after I played pro ball for 5 years and got released, I was living in Austin, Texas at the time. But I started coaching travel ball. It was honestly, it wasn't even really travel ball. It was more city baseball. We were just playing tournaments kind of locally. Um, and I knew I had the bug then because I was writing scouting reports for 12-year-old kids, and that's like crazy
You were
stuff.
doing too much. You were doing
Yeah,
too
I was
much.
doing way too much, but it was like it was fun for me,
Right.
and so I knew right kind of then and there that coaching was something that I wanted to get involved with. Um, but I was finishing my degree at the time online at Virginia Tech, and the Mariners called just by happenstance, and they had a scout development role open, and so I agreed to doing that, and I started kind of on the pro side, doing pro scouting stuff, and it didn't necessarily pique my interest. I don't know how much you know about pro scouting, but you're basically
Yeah,
I
tell
would
me
go to,
about this.
I would go to a major league game and I would write, a report on all 25 guys on their roster. So you stay for 5 days to make sure that you see all five starters. Um, but to me, it wasn't that interesting turning in a report that said, George Springer is really good at baseball. Like that to me just wasn't that fulfilling. And that was okay. I needed to
Mhm.
learn, you know, what a good player looked like and how to describe him and all that stuff. Um, but I asked to change to the amateur side, which was much more appealing to me
Mhm.
to go see the high school or junior college kid or college kid and say, hey, this kid could be the next George Springer, and that was cool to me. So I did an area, pretty big area, Waco, over to Nacogdoches, over to Midland, and south of that, which
Mhm.
is a giant kind of territory to oversee. But I saw all the high school kids and college kids and got prepared for the draft. And it was a really good opportunity for me. Everybody's kind of got their biases of players that they like, right? And I saw pretty quickly that I liked players that were similar to the way that I played the game, right?
Sure.
Which it's just the lens that you look through.
Mhm.
And I did that for about a year and a half. And then this job came open, and I shot a text to Coach Hughes and just said, I'd love to work for you. Love to have a conversation,
Mhm.
maybe about joining your staff, and the rest is history. So that was kind of my entry. Not many people get to go from no coaching experience directly to a Power 5 program.
Mhm.
So, like I said, I'm very fortunate for that opportunity and the trust that was put forth to do that. But typically, the path is much more rocky
Sure.
to getting to this level. So,
So I've got a ton of questions
yeah,
about even the scouting part of this because I think the scouting part, especially on the amateur side,
yep,
and then as what are doing now on the recruiting side, I bet you there's a lot of similarities in regards to how you evaluate players. You mentioned that you tend to gravitate to players that play the game the way that you played it, which makes complete sense. I'm so fascinated to find out when are you looking for things, especially when it comes to our African American players? You had a big section of Texas when you're doing amateur scouting. You're going to, I'm sure, all the perfect games,
yep,
all the tournaments and so forth. And there's a challenge there, like you said, to identify black players that really need to be spotlighted. Obviously, irregardless of the challenge of getting those players to those showcases and tournaments, um, is there kind of something extra or something different in when you're scouting and recruiting when you see a player that may be coming from a diverse background, maybe a background that doesn't have a lot of exposure to baseball, as in some of the kids that may have grown up in the suburbs that got private coaching all their lives. Is there something you look for, or is it by that point like, hey, look, everybody's got to be on the same playing field, everybody's got to play?
That's a good question. I think, like I said earlier, there is, especially at this level of baseball, there is a baseline of talent that you need to have to survive. And then the question becomes, how far away are they? They may have the baseline of talent, but is it going to take 5 years for them to reach kind of that potential that you see? And if there's a really long leash that needs to be had, then it's difficult to recruit that player. But a lot of African American players may have the talent level, right? They may just not have had the amount of reps that they need to get the skill acquisition at our level, right? And you have to kind of understand where they're at in their development process, right? To me, I think a lot of these kids play so much baseball, skill wise, they're so much further ahead of some of these players. You just have to kind of figure out where they're at. I'll see a player who he'll play a little bit of travel ball, super talented, but half the summer he's playing 7-on-7 football, right? Or, all fall and winter he's playing football and basketball. So he's only really dedicating, 3 months of the year, 4 months of the year to baseball. And
I don't want to cut you off, but that's a great point, because I always hear coaches say two different things. You probably know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
They want multi-sport athletes. They want well-adjusted athletes and so forth. But then doesn't that lead to the reps problem, like that you're saying? So it's like a little bit of a conflict from what I guess parents and other kids hear, because they're like, man, no, we want you to go play basketball or play football. We want, multi-sport athletes. And then they, lack of a better term, but there's another kid over there that literally is only getting reps at shortstop all day.
Yeah. It's a good question. We love our guys to be multi-sport athletes. You want your body to learn how to move different ways. You want to learn different team dynamics and team chemistry, and you're going to get that through playing a lot of different sports.
But it does kind of leave a little bit of a reps deficit.
Yes, and that is where you have to figure out, again, how far away is this kid from a rep standpoint, right? And some kids are much more adept to catching on quicker to certain skills. Again, that's another thing that you have to evaluate. And then on the other side of it, you have to figure out, like from a program standpoint, do you have the reps to give this kid to develop him to the level that you need him to be at, right? Yeah. Is the fall, like for our guys positionally, we'll send a lot of our incoming high school guys out to go play the summer before they get to campus, right? And so that automatically becomes part of the development process, right? So you have to look, okay, does 100 at-bats in the summer, 100 at-bats in the fall, 100 at-bats in the spring, is that going to get him to the level that, do you have those at-bats to give him, right? And that's a really kind of important decision to make when you're recruiting these kids, ultimately, because if you don't have those at-bats or innings or whatever it is, you probably don't have the time to develop them, right?
True. Do you find, and this will be the last question I ask about this, and then we'll go back on some other things. Do you find that there's less of a tolerance for some of our kids that may come from backgrounds where they don't get that development, don't get those reps? And this is what I mean by that. I was told, and it was really a poignant point. There was a former professional football player who has a son who's truly a prodigy in multiple sports. And he goes, Cheats, let me tell you the biggest difference I find when we're talking about football and baseball or basketball. He goes, my kid could go to a football game. Now, bear in mind, this kid is extremely physically gifted, but he goes, he could line up wrong on the football field,
Yeah.
run the wrong route, have the ball delivered right in his hands, drop the ball,
Yeah.
and go back to the huddle. And every scout will say, man, did you see that guy run? Look at, we can really work with this guy, right? He goes, that same day, his kid could go to the baseball field. He could go 3 for 4, hit a triple, home run, show some flashes. And he goes, but he might have struck out, say, that fourth time.
Yeah.
And says, the scouts will look at that kid and say, man, I don't know if he can hit the low and inside, up and tight. And he goes, it seems like the leash for especially black athletes when it comes to baseball is just so much shorter, where basketball and football, maybe because there's more administrators, more coaches, more people that understand their experience, will be like, no, that kid has it. He just has to work harder. I mean, is that something even in your playing experience? Have you found the leash has been a little bit shorter on people that look like us?
I definitely have. I mean, especially like, like on the pro side, the leash can be a lot longer because to me, like I know people say in the minor leagues, winning and losing doesn't necessarily matter. And there's some truth to that. Right?
There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. Because obviously it's a development game, right? Like to us, when we send guys out to summer ball, we don't necessarily care, that they win a bunch of games. We need them to get the development at bats or the development innings, right? That's what's important to us. So, I've seen it a little bit, but again, like at our level, wins and losses are everything. Right. And so
that's the difference about that college baseball spirit, right?
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
So if you have a guy out there that you're trying to develop, and there's a situation or a couple situations or moments that come up where, maybe he hasn't quite acquired the skill to be in that position and they fail or whatever it is, that it becomes really hard to then trust that player or put them back into that position if you don't have the leash for that. Right. So,
Speaking of leashes, let me ask you this. What is the hardest thing? Because you mentioned it. Your path was so unconventional. You're writing scouting reports on 12-year-olds. 2 years later, 3 years later, you're, at K-State evaluating, coaching, and leading players. What was the biggest adjustment for you as a coach to get the skills that you have now to do the things that you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, honestly, the hardest thing for me was figuring out, I mean, you have all these ideas, right? You have all these things that you want to get done and all these things that you want to teach these guys. And the hardest thing for me was taking all that stuff and all those thoughts and kind of shrinking them down into some kind of hitting philosophy and an approach philosophy, and not only shrinking it down, but making it so that it's easy to digest for these guys, right? And as much baseball knowledge and background that I have, if I can't articulate that to the guys, it doesn't matter how much I know, right?
Communication. So, you got to, communication is the key. Yep.
And that was the most difficult thing for me, years kind of 1 through 3. And then on that same note, college baseball is much different from the baseball world that I was coming from, right? And so, I mean, the pro side, right? So not only playing pro ball, but kind of evaluating pro guys. The things that win in pro baseball don't necessarily win in college baseball, right? And what I mean by that is, strikeouts, for example, for a long time in pro ball, it was just long balls and strikeouts, right? And then it started evolving. And in college baseball, the team that punches out the most is usually the team that loses the game. Right. Where in pro ball, it's much different. Right. So it was an adjustment for me. But I think the main thing was I needed to get a core thing of ideas together to be able to articulate to the guys so that I could teach them better. So
And that's such an interesting dynamic. You hit it right on the head. And you've got pro players, right? They're on your team, but they're going to be pro players maybe after this season, after next season. How do you talk to them about that adjustment? I mean, obviously it's K-State baseball philosophy while they're here, but now you've got guys where it's going to be like, hey, you're going to have some decisions to make. You're going to have, you're going into a new world. I've lived that world.
Yeah.
How do you even talk to them about that adjustment? Because you're right. As somebody that I live in Richmond. I'm, loyal and often at Eastern League, Double A, Richmond Squirrels, and all the other
At the Diamond, right?
I'm always there. I'm there, and I'm at other places watching high A baseball or double A baseball, and it is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. I usually wait until kind of their last year that I think they're going to be here before we kind of have those conversations. But generally, the main kind of message that I have for the guys, at least on the positional side, is you're going to have a lot of different voices telling you different things, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, there's only one name on the back of the baseball card and one person's stats, and those are yours. And you have to be able to take control of your own career. You can listen to the outside voices and everything and be respectful, but ultimately it's your path and it's your career, right? And so you have to be able to, don't want to say shake your head yes and listen, but at the same time stay true to who you are and understand it's your career. So
do the players at K-State know how good of a player you were?
I don't talk about my playing
do the
career
pitcher
very often.
You were like, I can take Coach Waits. I can take
I always tell our guys the hardest part to me about coaching, the further removed you are from the game,
sure,
the easier it feels, right? And so it's like, man, why can't, bases loaded, nobody out, we can't score 2 runs there, we can't hit that breaking ball, and I have to put myself in check constantly and tell myself, hey, if you were that good, you would still be playing right now, right? And that's what I tell myself, So it's very difficult. I try to always put myself in our players' shoes, right? And remember how tough of a game it is that they're playing. And I tell them, the thing that I don't like about this job is sitting in front of our guys talking about baseball like it's easy, right? Because it's not, And I think that resonates with them. They know that I understand how difficult it is, and so
that's funny. All right, so take me back. Let's go back to the beginning here, especially the formative years. I'm familiar with some of these places where you called home, but how did the game start for you?
So I was really high on soccer growing up. I liked basketball a little bit, but my dad always had a passion for baseball. And so he coached me until I was in my rebellious years at probably 12, 13 when he stopped coaching me. But ever since then, we both had a love for the game. And I played all kinds of positions. I was catcher for a little bit. My dad loved catching and played outfield for a little bit and shortstop. And I kind of got my hands in all parts of the game, which was fun. And ever since then, I kind of had the hook in me. So
when did you realize that you were looking around and you're like, hey, man, I'm pretty good at this game. I see where my peers are, and I feel like I'm doing okay. I'm excelling, if you will.
I think when my parents started getting phone calls to see if I could come play for these other teams, I kind of knew growing up that, okay, if these other teams are calling and wanting me to play, I must be decent, right? And then I grew up in the era where Ken Griffey Jr. was like the guy.
Yeah.
Well, so
do we all.
Yeah, watching that swing, I'm like, I want to do what that guy's doing, so again, growing up watching the Mariners play and going to the Kingdom, and that's kind of when I knew that this is what I wanted to do.
You mentioned Griffey. Who else were some of your guys growing up?
I loved Jeter. When I started playing infield, Jeter was and still is, honestly. I love just kind of the way that he carried himself and went about his business. I always loved um, A-Rod, Ichiro. Those guys were Mariners through and through. Edgar Martinez, Jay Buhner. I just loved watching those guys play. Mike Cameron kind of
Yeah.
later on down the road when we moved to
Cameron's
St.
solid.
Yeah, great player. So
Yeah.
that's kind of who I grew up watching constantly. But I would say more than anybody, Junior and Jeter were the guys that I really, really, I don't want to say modeled my game after, but those are the guys that I loved watching play. So
Now, when you were playing growing up, because this usually goes one of two ways, I ask most of our guests, did you grow up playing with other black kids? Or did you grow up in your kind of formative years and playing throughout like Little League and stuff? Was that was more like isolated experience? Like I was the only brother on the team. I had my parents with me, and that's about it.
I've done both. The first travel ball team that I played for was predominantly black. It was, we were called the Knuckleheads. That was our team name. Everybody hated playing us. We were athletic. We were, we could really run. We played the game hard. That was a fun time. And then I also played on, a travel ball team where I was the only black guy in the dugout. So I've done kind of all of it. I've been a part of a lot of different organizations on that side of it. So I've, again, seen different aspects.
So baseball to you was always almost in many ways you seen both sides, but it wasn't strange, if you will. It wasn't foreign to be on a team with a lot of other players that look like you or and coaches and administrators.
No, it was great. It was eye opening because I have seen how many good African American baseball players there can be, and it's interesting. I've kept in touch with a lot of those guys throughout the years, and just kind of seeing how their lives have unfolded. And I wish that more of them got the opportunity to play in college like I did. Whether there are other factors at play there and why they didn't, I don't know, but I know they were just as talented as I was playing at that time. So,
and there's usually a time period where it's almost like just a lot of your peers drop off. Like I've talked to a lot of pro players that have these similar experiences. Like, yeah, man, when we were 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, we were all rolling together. Then it gets to kind of this level of separation where, especially when you start to get into high school and some of those older, you're starting to travel, you're like, yep. Then I looked around, it was just two of us,
yeah,
or three of us, or one of us.
And that's where I'm thankful that my parents were there to really help guide me. They never pushed me one direction or the other. Whatever I loved to do, they were there to help me kind of, gain access to whatever it is I needed to continue to play. And they were always on the hunt for the new team if that's what we needed. But I think I was always a pretty focused kid as far as sports go. And without my parents being there every step of the way, I don't know that I would have had, the experience that I did. So.
In full disclosure for people that are listening that may not know, I actually happen to know the coach's mother. And the funny part about this is very much like my own mother. There's a very strong knowledge of self and a strong teaching of who we are as people, and never get it confused in regards to kind of who we are and knowledge of self. And I remember, this is funny, I don't know if this was your experience, but my experience was growing up, especially in high school and so forth. I'd always be like, Mom, I get it. I know. Like, stop. Like, relax. Like, I know I'm going to play baseball, but I know I'm black. I know what that means to be black and so forth. But it almost got to a point where I was like, yo, Mom, you got to chill. and now I look back on those. Obviously, I'm in my 40s. I look back on those and I'm like, I'm so glad my parents kept drilling that in, even well beyond the point where I was like, yo, you got to ease off.
Right.
But now I look back on it and I say, man, if I didn't have that foundation of just knowledge of self and what we went through, and it may not necessarily be, even though, my best friend is cool, he's a cool guy, but that experience may be different. And
Yeah.
like, was that something? I mean, like I said, I know your mother, so I know it was probably there. I don't know if it was over to the point where my parents were, but do you look back on that and say, man, they really did make sure that
Yeah.
that knowledge itself was there?
I definitely, I mean, my mom specifically was always making me aware of that. And I knew, I mean, I wasn't naive to it, but my mom was always, one of the people, like, just as an example, when I was playing soccer still at my all boys private school in Richmond. I mean, my mom brought like the 4 foot African drum to my games. Like, she was present, you know. And looking back on it, it's
Right.
pretty cool to know that she was willing to do that, and so that was always a fun experience for me. But I always knew my parents were there.
You
So
know, what's funny is, again, and I don't think we know this until we get older. I don't think I would have been. I had some experience in high school. I had some experiences in high school. As matter of fact, it's really funny because I had some experience in high school with like an immersion program where they brought a lot of St. Christopher kids in because they were conscious of this and trying to make some changes. But I think at those ages, I would have been naive to what we consider microaggressions,
yeah,
because I would have just been like, I would have even chalked it up to they don't know any better, or you know what I mean, like. I was always like I was always giving the benefit of the doubt, because I was like, hey, I'm going to be around these people, so I got to make sure I give the benefit of the doubt. My parents were the ones that always, and later on when I started learning what a real microaggression was, not just like an accident, but
right.
like everybody else gets to go to the sleepover and I don't get to go. You know what I mean? Like, but it was just like, I look back on that and you'll get a kick out of this story. It's a little bit more of a Richmond story, but I just remember, I believe it might have been Tuckahoe Little League around the time when I was in those years, and they had made a run to the Little League World Series. They made a run to the point where like we were able to see their games. And I love Tuckahoe. I don't have anything against Tuckahoe Little League. It's not my little league, but I don't have anything against. But
Right.
all the kids on that particular team were white.
Yep.
And I remember they were playing another team that was from somewhere in the South region. And that other team had, I think, 2 or 3 black players on it. Not a lot, but 2 or 3 black players. And I remember my parents were rooting for the other team.
You're like, what the heck?
And so, me not knowing any better, I'm
Yeah.
like, bro, like, yo, what's up with this? Like, this is our hometown team. And she looked at me and said, you see that second baseman and you see that center fielder? She's like, I see you in those kids. And I wanted to make sure that other people see it. So she's like, I'm gonna have to chalk this one up to the game.
Yeah.
And I like, later in life you understand that, but at first you're like, what is going on, bro? Like, what
Right.
is happening?
Yeah.
And so I always remember those stories. And now that I'm a parent myself and I've got a 9-year-old playing Little League baseball in the Richmond area, I'm looking for teams that have more diversity. I'm looking for leagues that have more diversity. And so, I mean, they're still going to have some of that, but at least I can say, like, yo, you ain't the only one, bro. Like, you
Right.
ain't the only one out there.
Right.
Um, Talk to me about St. Chris. I'm familiar with St. Christopher's. Now, was that a baseball decision or was that an academic? Because it's a great school.
Yeah. No, it was kind of between St. Christopher's and Collegiate, which is where Russell Wilson
We're gonna
went to.
talk about that. Don't bury the
Oh,
lead. Go ahead, go
sorry.
ahead, go ahead.
Yep. And St. Chris ended up being a really good fit for me, and I loved my time there. It showed me a lot of different things and different kinds of people and backgrounds. And when I was there, and I'm sure Richmond is still pretty similar, but um, I know it was a lot of old money and old families that were there kind of circulating. And so I got to see a much different kind of world. I mean, I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington. So it was, a little bit of a culture shock. Seattle was much more kind of new money, Microsoft type deal. And then kind of going there, I played 3 sports there, loved all my years there. And they've been very supportive of kind of my career and development as well.
So you mentioned it. I don't want to bury the lead, but you are around the same age and around the same classes where you would have had some interactions possibly with Russell Wilson, who obviously we know from NFL quarterback fame, but he was at a private school right across the way here in Richmond. Did you get a chance to square up against the collegiate team, and was Russell Wilson on those teams?
He was, yeah, both years that I was there. He was actually one of my tour guides when I visited collegiate, and we ended up playing on the same Legion team.
Okay.
Post, I think it was post 125 over there, right down the street from St. Chris. So played on a couple travel ball circuits with Russell, and so we played against each other a lot. We competed against each other when it was St. Chris versus collegiate, and great competitor and great guy. So
That's really funny. All right, Coach, you've been very gracious with your time. I want to get you out of here with some more kind of funner questions. You already explained to me um, who are some of the guys that you liked growing up. I like to ask every actually before I do that,
yeah,
I do want to change gears just a little bit because we alluded to this. You were a heck of a player. You were a heck of a player. We mentioned at St. Chris. You went on to be a heck of a player at Virginia Tech. Got drafted, and we'll have to come back and go through some of the minor league years here, Coach, because
yeah.
you actually made it through the gauntlet, if you will, of minor league professional baseball, and it did get to go to the show. Talk to me a little bit, really quickly, about that call up and what that meant for you, because it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. You'd been in the minors what 4 or 5 years by the time you got the call.
Yeah, so I actually I played. Let's see, it would have been 1 year of high A, 2 years of double A, 3 years of triple A.
Yep.
We went 2.5 years of triple A, but so I never actually got the call up. I got invited to Major League Spring Training
Ah,
twice.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I played in the exhibition game.
Yeah.
So I got the call to travel with the team with the Astros first to play the exhibition game after spring training broke. So I was kind of one of those last cuts, which was fine. But then I got traded to the Marlins, which I ultimately thought was going to be a better opportunity to get to the big
Mhm.
leagues. So I was excited about that. But looking back, kind of once I got there, I realized pretty quickly the outfield situation was Marcelo Zuna,
Mhm.
Christian Yelich, and Mike Stanton
Yep.
were the guys that I was competing with to get into the starting lineup and break camp with the Marlins. And two of those guys are MVP candidates, and so that wasn't going to happen. And then they ended up trading for one of my childhood idols, which was Ichiro.
Yep.
So
That's crazy.
ultimately, if you want to be a big leaguer, at some point you have to offer more value than some of those guys, and I just wasn't more talented, and I can live with that. So it was fun competing against those guys in spring training. Loved being around Ichiro every day and seeing how he worked at age,
Oh, that's so
I don't
cool.
know, 42, whenever he was playing, and kind of watching how he went about his business was fun. So
There's always a moment where it's like, even if there's always a moment where it's like, yo, this is real. I'm a professional baseball player. Like, I've been working all my life to get here. I am here. I'm at big league camps. I'm seeing big. When was that moment for you when you like looked around and was like, oh snap, this is different. My life, like, this is different.
yeah, I think my first realization of that was kind of when you get on the field. I think it was my second spring training game that I finally got in, and I was in the outfield, and there was, I don't know, 5,000 people behind me. Usually when you're playing games, all the people are in the stands are in front of you, and then next thing there's 5,000 people behind you screaming at you, which I thought was a very cool experience. But that's when I really kind of knew, okay, this is certainly a different level of baseball. So
That's awesome. That's awesome, Coach. Let All right. Let me get to the standard question that I have to ask every first time guest on
sure.
the mixtape, especially someone like yourself who's played the game at a very high level. All right, you faced a lot of pitchers. You face a lot of pitchers, eliminate them all. If you want
Okay.
to go back in history or even in the future, you can go back in history or in the future. If there's a pitcher that you would want to face, who is your dream matchup? You and your prime, you get to lace them up, step in the box. Who's that pitcher staring you down? Who do you get to face?
I think, gosh, I would say it'd be one of two guys. It would either be Pedro Martinez in his prime or Randy Johnson in his prime. I think. I just, you know,
If a righty and a lefty, it's pretty
yeah.
tough.
And Randy was a lot meaner than Pedro was, but as long as Randy didn't throw at me, I would love to face him. So
That's awesome. Um, let's talk really quickly before we get you out of here. Best advice you ever got?
best advice I ever got. Man, that's a tough one. I think to me the best thing. So Hunter Pence was a guy that really kind of, when I first got up to big league camp, he was one of those guys. He loved talking to the young guys, and he wouldn't even remember this, but he told me, just be who you are on the field. That's good enough. That's why you're here. And again, it's one of those things, if you just play up to your ability, at the end of the day, you can always go home and sleep good at night. I sleep really good at night because I know I maximize every bit of my ability playing at that level. And I always played my game, and if my game wasn't good enough, that was okay with me, but that was who I was, and yeah, I'm definitely thankful for that. So
How do we get more Coach Austin Waits in the system? And what I mean by that, you already mentioned your path was very unique, but there is a challenge to get African American coaches at that college baseball level, in levels higher than that. How do we get more Coach Waits in the system?
I think us as a group kind of getting that third assistant passed, I think that really does help, because honestly, the barrier of entry was really tough, asking people with families to volunteer their time, and now it's just going to take more people, kind of taking that, call it leap of faith, call it whatever you want, that, we can do the job, and I have a list of guys that I'm certainly going to call whenever I get a chance to become a head coach. But I think it's important that we continue to network as a group, with each other, with other coaches. That's really important so that people know that your name is out there. You want to be in the profession, and we can get more people, in this game. So.
Coach, we're gonna have to leave it there. That was fantastic. We're gonna have to do this again because there's so much that we didn't even get a chance to go through, and I know you have some amazing stories from your days of playing and beyond. So I wish you guys the very best of luck. Number 24 preseason in the country right now, but definitely a stacked, experienced team getting ready to in a couple weeks. It's going to be sooner than you know. You're going to be out there on the field, getting it going, man. So I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun. I'd love to come back on here. Hopefully I can come back on maybe in the summer after we made a trip to Omaha. So
hopefully I'll be able to see you in Omaha, because
that'd be
hopefully
great.
that'll be one of the places that the mixtape will be as we continue this season. So, Coach, I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be right back after this.